Welcome to Sales Bytes by Journey, where we talk about everything you need to know to be a killer at sales. I'm your host, Will Jenkins. Let's get it.
Hello. Welcome to Sales Bytes by Journey. Today we have Carlos Reyes, Senior Contract Specialist at Emerge. Carlos, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thank you, Will. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
We're going to talk a little bit about selling dedicated lanes. So, it's really interesting. You think about selling a transactional spot load and then getting someone to drive trailer or pick up a load every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or dedicate for a quarter or for a year. Very different sales process. So I don't know many people better at that than yourself. So walk me through the way you approach selling dedicated lanes.
Thank you, Will. I appreciate it. So ultimately, a dedicated lane means it's going to ship consistently from point A to point B, either Monday through Friday or Monday through Sunday, whatever that might be, where the attributes for that lane for that customer. But ultimately, you're truly solving, or you're helping your fleets solve a big network inefficiency, right? You'll be surprised, Will, and maybe not, but many people will be surprised of how many fleets that I talk to that drive back empty 1,000 miles. 500 miles. It's very consistent. It's a very constant theme. For me, I'm very passionate, not only about sales, but I love helping, right? So what better way for me is how to meet two together, right? So I like to actively, work with our customers in-house or our team, whatever organization you're at, understand what type of services you have, what type of freight, what type of customers, what type of logos, and then try to match that with the fleet's network, right? So if a carrier needs to get to Atlanta because their main customers there and they're heading from Illinois every single day, that is lost revenue, right? And it happens. Because What are you going to tell your customer? Hey, sorry, I don't have a truck, and they're paying them a premium, right? When you're shipping direct or however they got that customer. So being able to provide a solution and finding a customer that's going to help their network get back to their domicile, that is ultimately the greatest win of all time for all parties, right? Because there's a need. So the carrier is going to service your freight because they need to service it. They need to get back home. You're providing them a customer that's going to be ideal for their fleet, not only for the size, the type of fleet that they're hauling, right? If it's a van, a reefer, a flatbed, and the commodity, right? Also, that's very important, right? Because you don't want to keep something that's very time sensitive and you don't really have a time sensitive transit, right? So I'm not going to put a single driver on a team load, knowing that they're not going to make that transit. That's not good business, right? But what I get passionate about is going back to understanding, what the fleet really does within their network. How do they operate? How do they get to their customer? Do they have another customer to get to that customer? So understanding all the nuances on what their network is, it helps you efficiently, find the right customer to fit there. Because once you find that right customer for the fleet, it just becomes, what happens is full transparency. It's, you open Pandora's box, right? You start to understand more about their fleet, not so they trust you maybe on one lane. Okay, let's go back to Carlos, or let's go back to this other individual who's helping us get to where we need to get to. Ultimately, I'm here to help optimize, fleet's network, and any way I can, not only by dedicated freight, but also letting them know that maybe this dedicated lane might not be a right fit for them. Because again, once you start getting to that, you're trying to provide services that may not be a good fit, can be a bad fit for a relationship. But ultimately, how can you build a really good relationship being honest?
Yeah, man. I think that makes a lot of sense. You talk about solving those network inefficiencies and being able to bridge the gap so that they're maximizing revenue. Let's talk a little bit about what to be prepared with in a conversation. A lot of times you've had a couple introductory conversations. Maybe the carrier has run a few loads for you and you've identified a new RFP that your team is winning, some contracted lanes. What type of stuff should you go into, somewhat of a warm call or even a cold call with to provide the right information to a carrier if you're trying to sell them a dedicated lane? What type of stuff should I come ready to talk about?
Oh, first, one of the most common things is facility hours, right? What are the hours of the facility? Because oftentimes, again, it's very time sensitive. Some of the assets might need to get back pretty fast. The turnaround needs to be quicker, or some fleets say, hey, I need to get here, but not as quick. So I'm able to drop my trailer, right? So being able to, the first things they will always ask is, can I drop my trailer, or do they want to live load? That's important to understand that, right? Hours of operations, what's the commodity? Because if it's palletized or if it's floor loaded takes a long time. So if the lane might be perfect, but if it's floor loaded and they only have maybe 3 hours to spare, driver's hours, they have a lot of that data on that turnaround. That's going to be tough if you're only offering freight to them. That's not going to fit their network. And then ultimately, like what the commodity is, if it's going to be, refrigerated -20. I've had dedicated lanes where it takes a couple hours, in Las Vegas or in LA when it gets really hot. It could take a while for that, those ice cream loads to get the trailer right to that right temperature at -20. So that takes time too. So understanding those nuances is very important, because ultimately you want to be able to see if that's a right fit off the bat, right? You don't want to consistently keep going back and say, oh, let me get that information for you. Let me get that information for you. So if you come consistently with just the most bare basic and minimum of what the lane is, you're going to help them make either a good decision of, okay, let's look into if this is a right fit. But ultimately, facility hours are huge, right? And then any attributes, any equipment that's like flatbed, if they need, way more straps than normally. But one thing is to never do when you're offering is assume, right? Never assume that the shipper's open 24 hours. Never assume they're okay with drop trailers. Yes, always get that information and be sure, because I've been there, right? I've learned from my mistakes. I was a young rep, but it's making sure you have the right information, at least at the bare minimum.
Totally. So let's talk a little bit about mistakes, right? We all make them. We've maybe dedicated a lane and forgot to mention some particulars, or maybe we didn't get them and they didn't match up. So what do you notice are some things that maybe a carrier rep might miss as they're working through a dedicated lane? It gets activated. Now we're rolling and, oh, shoot, man, this doesn't work. What are some things that people might, gloss over, and it ends up being a little bit of a headache?
Yeah, if what a true drop trailer solution, right? Oftentimes, drops can mean different in our industry. It can mean, here, drop your trailer, pick it up 6 hours later, or it's a drop trailer 24 hours, 48 hours drop trailer. Also, one of the biggest mistakes I think we all have made is how many days is free, right? Just so if it's a 48-hour drop trailer, but when does the detention start on the drop trailer past the 48 hours? I think that's really key, because I've seen, not necessarily myself, but I've seen people have really difficult conversations where they really should have told them, yes, it is 48 hours free, but it could take 5 to 6 days to your trailer get empty. And then what you're really just selling a 48-hour drop trailer. Right. So that becomes very difficult for a carrier who needs that trailer for that core business, for the network. So if you're trying to sell into a larger fleet and they need those trailers within 48 hours, that's a big mistake. And I've seen it happen. Being able to make sure that, there's a lot of shippers that will tell you, hey, we take some time to unload. We're not your average 2-hour, unload and live load. So getting that information is very key, because remember, end of the day is driver hours. We want to make sure we're protecting the driver's hours. Any little mishap on hours of service can push back a carrier, multiple days behind. And it's important to make sure that you're listening to those nuances, because there's nothing better, Will, when you're finding that right customer and that right fleet. It is like the most exciting moment, because it's going to work. But also at the same time, I've seen the most stressful moments when you don't do your homework and you assume.
Totally.
Right. I've been there. I made that mistake. I've learned from my mistakes, but it's important to make sure that you don't repeat those mistakes.
Totally. Yeah, there's not many things cooler than winning some dedicated freight and then finding the right carrier partner, and it just goes off without a hitch, and it's almost set it and forget it. They execute, customer's happy, you're happy. That's super cool to be able to make those pieces of the puzzle fit.
It's an amazing feeling. It's an amazing feeling.
So a couple things that you mentioned here: solving network inefficiencies, facility hours. Man, is it a true lie? Is it live loading? Is it drop? What's the commodity? How does that impact how the product is loaded? And then the last part that you mentioned that will catch people up sometimes is just truly understanding loading or unloading times? And hey, what is, you say drop trailer, but does that mean same day pick up the trailer? Does that mean it's sitting there for a couple of days? Any closing thoughts as you think about, man, I'm going to make some calls, I'm going to execute and sell a dedicated lane? Anything to leave some people with as they figure out how to go build some dedicated lanes?
Yeah, I think it's back to one of the root causes, right? Is making sure you do your homework, but also asking the right questions, right? Why they need to get to, back to Illinois to Atlanta, right? Why they need to get to Atlanta, 3 days a week. Understanding who their customer is, right? I always tell somebody, you don't always have to, work with me 100% of the time, but let me help you get to where you need to get to. Let me help you go make your money. What that means is your customer, you worked very hard to get that customer. As we know, customer acquisition takes time, and it's hard to get customers, let alone in this market. So I don't want to disrupt that business model. I want to elevate them. I want to be able to supply a solution for them. So I always tell people or assets when I'm selling dedicated is let me help you get to where you need to get to. And if it's not now, it could be tomorrow, right? Learning more about it.
Yeah.
But there's never a better good feeling when you can provide that solution like, hey, I found this right customer in this right lane that's going to get you where you need to get to. It might be 50 miles away from your customer, but it's going to get you there every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And no better feeling to be able to provide that on that phone call. But ultimately is making sure you're not disrupting a carrier's workflow or their network. It's just making sure that you're there to help. Everything should be an addition.
Awesome, man. I think that's a great point to end on. Really appreciate you joining Sales Bytes to talk a little bit about carrier sales, dedicated lanes, and things of that nature, man. Like I said, you're one of the best I've ever met in the space. So thank you very much for sharing some knowledge.
Thank you.